Okay, so there is, in fact, a question, and I forgot to write it down, um, that I ask every single person who appears on this show,
Okay.
and that is this. It has nothing to do with music, by the way. Um, if you could take a movie,
Mm.
any movie in the history of the world, replace everyone but one person with Muppets, what movie would it be, and who would remain human? I will give you just an example, so that way it gives you a moment to think about it. Um, my go-to answer is The Princess Bride. I think that would be a fantastic movie with Muppets. I would keep Prince Humperdinck as a human, except I would replace the actor with Adam Driver because I think he would be perfect in that role. And me and a buddy of mine actually casted the entire cast. Obviously, Kermit would play the Dread Pirate Roberts, and Miss Piggy would be Buttercup. But probably the one that hits me the most, because when we were originally casting, we were talking about using Sweetums as Fezzik, because obviously Andre the Giant played Sweetums. But then we thought, wouldn't it be just on brand with the Muppets if Fezzik was played by Rizzo the Rat, and everyone just went with it. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Um,
that's my thought process when it comes to that. But do you have an idea or one that you would like to throw out there?
let's do Back to the Future, and we'll keep Marty, right? That's his name.
Yeah, Marty
Michael
McFly.
J. Fox. Yeah.
Yeah.
He has to stay the human, and then everyone else. I was gonna go with Christopher Lloyd's character, but I feel like he has to be a Muppet.
I feel like that would be a great role for Bunsen Honeydew.
Oh yes,
So
definitely.
so I think that is on point. I actually like that a lot.
Hmm.
Except I don't know who Kermit would play. That's the only thing I can think of.
Hmm. Yeah. Who would play the principal? Who's like the villain Muppet?
I mean, there's Deadly. I mean, he's a
Yeah.
newer Muppet. I mean, that would work. Uh, the only thing I will say with that is that I like the idea of it, but instead of Marty being the only human, I would keep Biff as the human,
Mm,
so that way
mm.
he's embarrassed by Muppets the entire movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
uh, Kermit and Miss Piggy play the parents, and Marty is played by Walter.
Okay. Yeah, I can go with that.
I think that would be a lot of fun. That would be a good. And welcome back to another episode of First, Last, and Best. That's right, we are on our second week here on the road to Supernova, our Summer of Ska series. I have just floored that Tim was able to come on last week and talk to us about Supernova, the festival, its history. It's fantastic. This has been a lot of fun. There's a lot more great episodes coming up. But honestly, this particular episode is one that I've been incredibly excited about uh, since I started piecing everything together. And our guest today is a historian, he's an author, he's a fellow podcaster. Uh, and if you remember California in the early 90s, you may remember him from his music career as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the author of In Defense of Ska, the host of the podcast In Defense of Ska, RIP, by the way. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Aaron Carnes. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this. Where did your love affair with ska start?
Well, it started when I saw Skank and Pickle play, and it had to be like 1991
Mhm.
here in the Bay Area. I don't remember exactly why I went to the show, but I was definitely in a phase where I was very interested in the sort of underground club bands, and a lot of that was stuff like Primus had just come out of the Bay Area club scene, and I was a big fan of them, and
Mhm.
so a lot of bands like that, where it was maybe some of the like funk rock and some of the alternative punk stuff I was pretty into and wanted to catch those shows. So I eventually landed up at a Skanka Pickle show, and I was just like completely hooked. And that was the first time that I knowingly was listening to ska. I think I must have listened to ska in some capacity before then, but I wasn't aware of it as a genre.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of one of those things is just like it's could be on the radio every now and then, something that kind of just crosses your ears when you're in a record or in a record shop or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's I hate to put it like this, but it could be background noise. And
Mhm.
honestly, any band or music can be background noise. But legitimately going to a show like that and then embracing that music, I mean, it's it's something else. It really is.
Yeah.
Like I remember the first time, like I, Real Big Fish, Less Than Jake was kind of like my entrance into ska music, but I was also starting to listen to like late '90s. Um, but I remember there were some local bands here in Virginia, like the No Talent Show and Jack Move,
Hmm.
that really kind of was like, oh, there's more to this than just, your third wave, happy, poppy kind of ska music. And that really kind of opened the door to start listening to, the Slackers and then or the Toasters and the English Beat. Oh my God, the English Beat. Um they're probably one of my favorite two-tone bands that I've started listening to. So eh, one of the things I truly love about the book is it's very personal.
Hmm.
Like it is you do an excellent job of like covering the different waves, lack of better way of putting it, um, and the history behind it, but your personal anecdotes of actually embracing the genre and then kind of stop. Sorry, my dog's trying to lick the microphone. Stop. Can you please stop? You need to stop. Okay. Sorry. I have a little 3-year-old Boston Terrier
Hmm.
who
Yeah.
does not like being anywhere that's not my lap for one reason or another. So sorry, getting off track very, very early. So what is the one thing in the early days of like getting into Skanking Pickle and then like finding all these other bands and what about those days really kind of still sticks with you all these years later?
Well, I guess, well, I think some of it was that it was, even though I was getting into different styles of music and different bands, I think when you're in that age, you kind of look for something that's yours. And I think that even though a lot of the stuff I was getting into before then is still stuff that I liked, and I probably still like some of that. I don't know, it just felt like it was something that was the most I connected to the most as mine. Like, this is my music, this is my scene. I think I liked that it was like live music, it was energetic music, but it was like musical, and it wasn't just like because I think at the time you think of like energetic music in clubs was mostly like metal or punk, I guess. At
Hmm.
least that's kind of what the landscape was like at the time. So it was something that was, it had horns, it had like maybe kind of interesting songwriting elements to it. So it had that sort of energy that you look for when you're young, when you want to like see live music in a small venue, but it was like more complex and
Yeah.
more musically interesting, I guess. So I think those are some of the things that really appealed to me about it initially. And I think why I continue to enjoy the music and continue to listen to ska probably has more to do with just my love of the ska groove, I guess. That I just think that the sound of it just sounds, I don't know, it just sounds good in my ears. It just feels good in my body. I just enjoy hearing it. Especially I think probably like, I probably lean more into liking the music as a something that's more of in a dance tempo rather than a as fast as you can possibly play tempo, which was
Yeah,
probably something I was really into when I was younger.
I could 100% understand that.
Yeah.
It's like, especially like, especially these days, I like I'm getting into my 40s and like the really spirited, like really fast, like the tempo is just insane. I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm gonna step back here and let you young kids run around in a circle. Let me know when it slows down a little bit, please, and thank you. Um, so I could definitely understand that, and to this day, I feel like, especially like reading your book and then reading like Hell of a Hat and like
Hmm.
actually learning the history and the actual true roots of what ska is, it feels like it's made me not necessarily embrace it more, but appreciate the complexities of it, especially as it's rooted in depth in politics and civil
Hmm.
rights, and it's just it's more than just like real big fish dick jokes and let's all have fun and drink beer, guys. No, there's way more to it than that. And I, when when did you discover that ska was a lot like that? That it was more, or was that kind of like more of like around your origins? Because I know Skanking Pickle uh, was you've mentioned it several times in the book and today that Skanking Pickle was like your origin story or your first band that really kind of got you into the scene. At what point did you realize that it's fun, it's energetic, but there's so much more behind it than just fast-paced, complex
Hmm.
music?
I think fairly early. I mean, Skink and Pickle, for as much as they were a band that was like theatrical and chaotic and all this, so they always were pretty upfront about like the anti-racist message. And I think at the time, like I don't, it's hard to remember a lot of bands outside of ska, maybe some punk bands, maybe some bands here and there where they were so overt about it, I guess. It's not
Yeah,
like I'm not like saying that these were racist bands, but it's not like I don't know how many of them really made a point to like say this is what we're about, this is where we stand on this issue.
yeah,
Whereas like I felt like even at that first show, that was an element of the Skank and Pickle show. Um, and it was certainly part of what I liked about it.
yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Uh, like Skanking Pickle, like is just a band that I've gotten into more in the last year or two.
Hmm.
Honestly, when I was reading your book, a lot of these bands are bands that I had never heard of before.
Hmm.
And I would be like be reading and then I'd be like, wait, pause, write this down. I'll go listen to that later. Keep reading. Oh wait, there's another one. Let's like Edna's Goldfish I never heard of before. Skanking Pickle is another one. Much to my shame, Spring Heel Jack is another one that I never really listened to before. So this really gave me a lot of homework to do, which listening to new bands, I mean, that's the kind of homework that I want to do. So, uh, I really got to thank you for that because that really was it helped me embrace more of uh what ska is and like, just how diverse and huge of a genre. Um, so let's kind of dive in a little more into the book itself.
Sure.
At what point did you decide? I know I was reading, especially in the acknowledgments, that when your wife ended up reading through and editing some of it in 2019, and then again for the second edition in 2023. At what point did you decide, I want to write this? I want to take this on as a project
Hmm.
and push this forward?
Well, originally, somewhere around 2013, because I'd been a music journalist for a number of years at that point,
Hmm.
and so I was really into music books and stuff. So somewhere around 2013, I was thinking that it would be really cool to write a book about Scott in subcapacity. I didn't feel like there was much that existed. I mean, Heather had a few books at that point. There was definitely some books on Jamaican ska, or if not full books, um, it was always sort of the first chunk of a reggae oral history was going through the whole ska period. Um, there was, I mean, even at the time, there was some stuff on two tone, but there wasn't really like they're just recently. Daniel Rachel just recently wrote a pretty in depth two tone history, but at the time, there wasn't even really like a full comprehensive book about the two tone scene. So I just felt like it was a thing that felt lacking, and so I knew I wanted to write something about it, and I wasn't really sure what though. So I kind of went through this period for several years where I was wanting to write a book about ska, and I was collecting interviews, and I was sort of, kind of coming up with different ideas. Because the thing about writing a book is that you have to have some sort of focus, you have to have some sort of angle. You can't just say, I'm going to write about ska. Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? So, is it focused on an era? Is it have an angle to it? So, I felt like every few months I would slightly adjust what I was thinking it was going to be. So, I would just collect interviews and I didn't really write much. So it took like several years before I came up with the concept of, in defense of ska, of like saying that I'm going to defend ska and really focus on that angle,
Hmm.
which dictated sort of the kind of bands I ended up writing about. Like it wasn't really a book that necessitated me focusing much on Jamaican ska, really more so for context and also about stuff like how the Scottlights returned to being a touring act in like the late 80s and 90s and the impact that had on sort of the new traditional ska scene of the 90s. So like the my focus wasn't like let's talk about like how did ska develop in Jamaica. That wasn't really my focus. And I wasn't particularly focused on two tone as well because I felt like again, this was more for context because I felt like as I was leaning into this idea of defending ska, the kind of ska that most needs defending is everything that sort of came after two tone. So everything,
Yeah.
so Jamaican ska two tone, they, I think most people will give them the credit, give those periods the credit that they're due. Like, but I think after that is the period where people are very dismissive about it, and that's why I decided to sort of look at the stuff that was most dismissed as a focal point.
I was gonna say it did feel like we spent a lot of time in the 90s and 2000s, especially 2000s, where it felt like ska uh, as a genre fell out of favor, um,
Yeah.
like an anvil, when really it was still around, but it was just kind of like not necessarily these pockets, but you really starting to see like different aspects of it. So it's like West Coast had their scene, and then there was like more of like Midwest, Detroit, Chicago.
Hmm.
Then obviously your East Coast, and then getting down into Florida, and then New Orleans, which you wrote about beautifully, especially after Hurricane Katrina and the impact it had there. Um, what do you feel was the hardest part about writing the book?
The hardest part, well, I think, the definitely was the hardest part for me was the part that led to me making the decision to make it be a defensive ska and to be
Mhm.
written in non-chronological essays. And that was the hardest part was choosing what I was going to write about. And because when you choose something, you are saying no to something else. And that's a
Yeah.
difficult thing to do is to say no, that I'm going to like only do this stuff here. So that was probably the hardest part. And then, because once I came up with the idea and once I kind of gave myself permission to say that these were going to be standalone essays and that even though we were all talking, we was going to talk about the same topic and that they might reference each other, that they were going to be very individualized pieces, each chapter in this concept of like looking at ska as a dismissed slash misunderstood genre and sort of pushing back on that in
Yeah,
various ways. And sometimes that way was through like expansive history where I would interview a lot of people and write like more journalistic type pieces, but also like you said, like touching on my own story, my own story as a member of an insignificant ska band. We weren't a ska band of any historical note, but that's not really the point. The point is to kind of like give people a sense of what it felt like to be in a ska band at that time and because I feel like that's something that if you weren't in a ska band, you probably have no idea what that's
yeah,
like. Because the underground scene was a major part of the ska scene, especially when it was becoming a major scene. Like there was still this major scene of all these bands touring in vans and playing shows to 40 people. I mean, that still
yeah.
existed. Yeah.
Honestly, that was one of my favorite parts of the book was reading about your experiences. And I mean, that's always been like I'm a big fan of musician autobiographies.
Hmm.
Frank Turner's The Road Beneath My Feet, Andrew McMahon's Three Pianos. So reading about your personal experiences in the genre and touring and running around and like having the experiences of a band member it really kind of pulled me in as much as the history and learning and hearing the stories of others as well. The fact that you put yourself out there was part of why I love the book so much. Anyways,
Uh,
you went from ska musician
hmm.
to a writer of uh, you were a writer before the book.
Yeah.
What kind of led to that? I mean, is it just you just kind of fell into it? Is it just like, was that a goal of yours or?
So I was writing fiction for a long time, probably through my 20s into my 30s. But then in my early 30s, I kind of made a change where I was like really interested in becoming a journalist. And so I started freelance writing for newspapers and whatnot.
Mhm.
And that sort of took over my life because I started having some successes as a freelance journalist. I was writing mostly about music, but I would occasionally write about art or food or not hard news very much. But I was taking on different assignments. And so I didn't really write much fiction at all at that point because I was writing so much articles.
Mhm.
And because I was writing a lot of music articles, like probably 75 to 80% of what I was putting out there was music articles. It was definitely making me feel more and more like it brought me to wanting to write a music book because I was just doing so much. And that's what led me to think to myself, like, what would be the music book that I could write? And then that led me to think like both that I was like a good person to write it and that it was missing. It was something on ska.
Yeah,
So yeah, it was really definitely related to me having been a music journalist for a number of years.
it's awesome. So you mentioned earlier that you got to a definitive point where you were actively chose that this book is going to be in defense of ska.
Hmm. Yeah.
Was there, what is the road not chosen? What is the road not traveled? Was there another that was competing with that you were
Well,
considering writing about or having that be
I
the
think
focal point or
I think like I was thinking a little bit more straight before I landed on that, like more historical, more journalistic, and trying to maybe write document it in a more dry way, like ska history. And I think to some degree, I was thinking about post two-tone and American ska, partly because that's where what I came up in, but also for the same reason, in that it was like the most undocumented
Mhm.
of the genres. So I definitely think that there was some part of me that was being pulled towards thinking about, probably at the time, more like 80s to 90s ska and in the
Mhm.
US, and like how can I sort of show all of this stuff that feels to me pretty undocumented. And like I would have these moments where I would read books that would document like the punk scene or underground scene in the 80s and 90s, and it just seemed like it was a weird, like it was so obviously missing from that. Like the ska bands, particularly in the 80s and the early 90s, the ska bands and the punk bands and the alternative bands, they're all playing together. So it's not like it existed in a completely separate universe. It was like in a way it was more commingled, like because
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of bands of any genre. Like all bands of genres, like, they had to commingle. It just, there wasn't the amount of bands, there wasn't the amount of venues. It just, there was, if you were in an underground band, like you were playing with all other underground bands. So ska was just part of that. And I was like, why did these books never mention, like, XYZ ska bands that were also around? I was so that's, I think I was definitely pulled towards, maybe I can document like ska from 80s or maybe early 90s, or that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
if you'll notice, like there's some chapters where, like there's one chapter where it's like the longest or second longest chapter in the book, where I go through in depth of like 80s American ska. And
Yeah.
some of the reason I wrote that chapter is because in the early days, before I landed on the concept of In Defense of Ska, I had really taken it to start interviewing a lot of those bands, partly for the reason I just stated, but partly because it was slightly before my time. And
Mhm.
so I knew the Untouchables. I was a fan of the Untouchables, but I didn't know a lot about them. And same with Bim Scala Bim. Toasters, I knew the Toasters as a 90s band, although aware that they were an 80s band, but not really aware of their 80s history.
Mhm.
So, and of course, Fishbone, I always loved Fishbone.
Yeah.
Probably knew the most about Fishbone of the early days of any of those bands. But so I think like there was something in me that was like, I want to fill in my gaps. I want to document some. So I interviewed a ton of those bands early on. And then some part of me was just like, well, as I'm thinking of chapters that make a lot of sense for In Defense of Ska, and like looking at the 90s thing and the 2000s thing, I was like, I can't just like let all of these interviews go to waste. I got to think of some way to utilize all the hours and hours of time I spent interviewing these bands. So I crafted that chapter to kind of like make a point about how those bands, there was all these great bands that formed in the 80s that sort of basically, they were the bridge in a sense to what happened in
Yeah.
the 90s, and they were an important bridge because they helped distinguish like what would become like an American sound. It's different than like the English two-tone sound, because I also felt like there was a narrative that third wave ska was like a revival. It was like a kids growing up listening to two-tone and then putting their own spin on it. And I felt like while there was some truth to that, it really had a lot more to do with like the bands in the early to mid 80s forming, that were listening to two tone and building scenes. And then the next wave of bands, many of them started in the late 80s and early 90s, who were influenced by those bands. A lot of them because they were the band in the local scene, right?
Yeah.
Like Gangster Fun was like the Detroit band, and also like the band that a lot of the Midwest kids listened to in the mid 80s. So like there's an important aspect to that 80s scene. All the Some of the bands that were lost to time, some of the bands like Fishbone that we all know. So the influence that it had in developing what was the quote unquote third wave.
Do you feel like that particular era ended up needing the most research, or would you feel like more of like the roots in Jamaica or the two-tone scene of the late 70s, early 80s required a little more focus and research for the book?
Well, I see the thing is like for me to understand Jamaican ska more than I already did, there was a few good resources. Like there's this excellent book called Bass Culture that is essentially a reggae oral history book. It's
Mhm.
probably the best book you can buy if you want an overview of like the history of reggae. But
Writing
it's
that down.
the first third of that book really gives you a history of ska,
Yeah.
and then you get a history of rocksteady, and then you get a full history of like reggae through the 70s. I don't think it gets into dance hall or anything, but so I mean that was something I read that I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do a better job documenting this guy. He wrote this like in the 90s, and a lot of those people that he interviewed firsthand have passed away at this point. So he got all the like firsthand interviews. So I read that book. There was a movie called what is it called? There's a documentary. It's not like available anywhere, but I saw it at a film festival. It's like the Legends of Ska or something like that,
Yeah.
and it's a really good documentary on Jamaican ska. And it's really a shame that it's not like something you can just watch on streaming or anything. I don't know. I don't know the issues of why that guy never got that film distributed or anything, but I saw that it was coming through San Francisco, and I went and saw it, and I thought it was a really good film, and it really breaks down a lot of the stuff. So there were like, in a way, there was a lot of resources if you look for them, sort of available to
Hmm.
like say like here's a really good breakdown of Jamaican ska. And for two tone at the time, like now, I would recommend the two tone book that Daniel Rachel wrote if someone wants to know. But at the time, I found other really good resources, and there was like a lot of documentaries that the BBC made that really kind of break down in a way that was they weren't like two tone focused, but they would be like here's British punk, right? And so the two tone ska is like a part of that. So you're going to
Hmm.
get good history on two tone by watching their mini series on punk, or there was another one called like Reggae Britannica. So they're kind of explaining British reggae, and that's its own thing. And ska, they put two tone ska in there. So there was like these resources that gave me pretty good information on that. Now, at the time, there was no resources on 80s ska. Now there is one now, and that's Mark Wasserman's book, Ska Boom. Like he actually wrote an oral history on several of the bands, American bands from the 80s. And actually, he was a resource. I take that back because he used to be a blogger, and he used to write about all of those bands. So, and I interviewed him a few times, but he was the only one I was aware of that was writing about obscure 80s ska bands from the
Yeah.
US. Yeah. So yeah, it did feel like maybe the most research because I wasn't personally a part of most of it, and there wasn't really much out there that I had to really lean on heavy interviews for that.
I was gonna say my last year in our Summer of Ska series, I was talking with the drummer from Plastic Flamingos, and he told me about Skaboom, and I keep meaning to buy it and read it, but it's trying to track it down without using something like Amazon to
Hmm.
actually buy it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's kind of hard. And I work at like a secondhand bookstore at night, so I'm every single time I show up, I pull up the database and I'm just like these books I'm trying to find. So, um, so based on your research, is there a particular band that you found and started listening to based on the research you were doing about the 80s and 90s or any era for that matter that has stuck with you till now?
Let's see. I mean, I definitely listened. There's a lot of bands that I was a fan of that I maybe had a single record or two, but I didn't necessarily know their entire catalog because that's
Hmm.
part of my process. Writing this book was like really familiarizing myself with every as many, going through like every Toasters record rather than maybe the three I knew well. Um, but I would say probably the stuff that I knew the least about that I'm very much interested and listen to now is probably more of the global stuff, the non-US stuff.
Mhm.
I had very limited experience with ska outside of the US or England prior to beginning this book. And now that has definitely grown quite a bit. And it grew a lot with the podcast too, because I was trying to do my best to get more bands in the podcast that were not based in the US.
So that actually leads us to a nice little pivot
Mm,
because In Defense of Ska, yes, is a book, but you also converted it into a podcast as well. What inspired you to do that? Like actually start
mhm.
entering into the podcasting realm?
Well, initially it really was like a way to promote the book. And some of that was because we were in the pandemic when it was happening. My In Defense of Ska, the first edition was released in May of 2021.
Mhm.
And the promotion for the book began like, 9 months before then. So we're talking like fall, late summer, fall of 2020. That's pretty just deep pandemic at that point. And not really sure how I'm supposed to promote a book without, I'm not really, you don't really know
Yeah.
where it's going or when it's changing or anything. So I was definitely trying to think of different things I could do that didn't require me to leave my house to promote the book, and that the podcast was something that I thought of. I came up with the idea to the podcast probably in like November or October or November in 2020,
Mhm.
with the idea that the book is coming out in May 2021. And then I took a podcast class, which was mostly useless. However, I did get a few things out of it. I will say there was some aspects that were really like um, were like too big. Like they made it too big. Like they're like, yes, you have to because they were like talk about how professional podcasts you would like if you were interviewing somebody remotely, you would
Mhm.
hire like a sound team in that would could go and get the sound right. This is something that
Yeah.
like NPR would do this, right? So like I'm going to interview Tom Hanks, but I can't be in the same room as him because he's in Australia on set and I can't get down there, right? So okay, so but we need to get like a professional sound guy in Australia there, and he's going to get the audio there, and we're going to record on Zoom or Skype or whatever, and then my audio is being recorded locally and professionally. So then I'm gonna get the audio sent from Australia, and we're gonna sync it so that it's the best crisp audio, like we're in a professional studio. Like they were talking about stuff like this, and I'm just like, how in the world am I gonna do that? And then not understanding until kind of jumping into it that like the quality of audio that you get through Zoom and actually like some of the podcast apps that were coming out,
Oh yeah.
like it's not like your average person, including me being an average person, could really tell the difference between like as long as somebody has a decent mic, you're going to get pretty good audio without
Yeah.
hiring a sound team. So that was part of that was a little bit of the wrong-headed direction that I got from that class. But we did discuss structure, and I think I built some of the structure of In Defense of Ska through that class, like having an intro and then having like me and Adam talking with each other a little bit for a few minutes and then just kind of transitioning into the interview. Like that was sort of built out through the class. And then yeah, Adam and I we recorded like probably like 5 episodes in December. Like I wanted to have a few in the bank before we released them, and then yeah, we released the first one in like the second week of January or third week of
Mhm.
January, and then yeah, then it was like we were doing them every week, and then the book released in May, so the podcast had been going for what was that like 4 or 5 months at that point,
Yeah.
and by the time the book was released, like right around the time the book was released, we had interviewed Jeff Rosenstock for Ska Dream, and like kind of right around the time Ska Dream had come out, and he hadn't really done a lot of like interviews for Ska Dream, so that one did really well. and we interviewed Patrick Stump, and that one did extremely well. And so there were a few interviews that really were kind of taking the numbers up a level right around the book release. So I think we were wanting to kind of keep going because we were getting good interviews and good guests, and it was fun to do. And so yeah, I don't know exactly when, but at some point we were just like, let's keep doing this. Like it doesn't have to be promotion for the book. It can be our own thing. But it was definitely, you know, my my initial intention was this is a way to promote the book, to get people interested in learning about this book and wanting to buy it from me.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's kind of brilliant, especially in the pandemic day and age where do you really want to leave your house? I mean, so,
Yeah.
and I mean, it is very fortunate that we are in a day and age where as long as you have a decent mic, you can, and honestly, a connection with Zoom, because this has been, I've been podcasting since first episode I released was in December of 2021. Because I've had four different shows that I've done over the years,
Hmm.
and like this is the one that has really kind of stuck with me. And I've only been doing this for consistently for a little over a year now. So, and I try not to think about numbers because it just makes me sad. I mean, if it seems like literally you've for the podcast, it like you said, originally a tool to promote the book, and then it kind of took on a life of its own.
Hmm.
And one of the episodes that stuck out to me was Are the Beatles Ska? Um, because growing up, I would sit and listen to records with my dad, and he had a ridiculous number of Beatles albums, and that thought never crossed my mind before that particular episode. So, but I just love that it really did take on a life of its own. At what point, because at this point, it is, you guys are done. It
Hmm.
is finished.
Yeah.
What made you decide, I think we've taken this as far as we can?
Well, I think the main thing was it was me. It was a personal kind of thing for me, and that I felt like I had released the second edition in I want to say October or September. I think it was October 2024. I did some I did some traveling, some book dates.
You were at Supernova, because
Oh,
I remember
that's
me
yeah,
and my friend Chris met you at Supernova, and that's how we heard about the book, and
yeah,
we ordered it from you. So
very nice. Yeah,
thank
so
you.
then um I think like in 2025, I was that's where I was playing with format more like, the
Yeah.
Beatles episode and stuff. I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, but I was like, like I was always a writer. I've been a writer since my 20s, and I was feeling like I was having a hard time finding time to write because, doing a podcast every week it takes a lot of time. And it's not like it made enough money that it made it so I wouldn't have to have a job elsewhere, right? So I kind of got to the point where I was like, I'm not writing enough. I want to move on and do some new writing projects. And I think that the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I let the podcast go, because it's just too much time for me to be able to do it and do it well, and also, start a new book or work on some writing and stuff.
That actually leads us into another very interesting direction. And a
Okay.
part of that is your future. Recently, you announced that you're co-authoring a memoir for Hobo Johnson.
Yes.
Um, what do you think is the most important thing that we need to know about him?
Well, I think like so a lot of people have opinions about him. Some people love him, some people hate him, but some people have no idea who he is, because I think like depending on your age, you may have no clue who he is.
Yeah.
But I think like his story is very interesting in terms of I think it really hits on what it's like to be an artist in the age of social media and the internet.
Hmm.
Like, I think his story, he's a very extreme version of this, but like everybody sort of deals with like this. Um, if you have attention, all of a sudden you're getting this ridiculous amount of scrutiny and people having opinions about you or opinions about your personal life and judgments. And I understand it, but it's probably reached it's reached a level where I don't know how one lives under that scrutiny.
Yeah.
And I think he's experienced that. He's continuing to experience that. Like right now, he is somebody that people are making videos about and making fun of. He's not even very active right now, and he's people are just trashing him left and right on the internet. So I think that there's a conversation about sort of the age we're in, the last decade of what it means to be an artist. That his story is like, I think, gives insight to. But I also think it's interesting. His story is also interesting too because he went from being a local artist. I got to know him when he was a local artist because
Hmm.
he's from Sacramento, which is where I'm from. And actually, I was a pre In Defense of Ska. I was an active music journalist, and in the sort of the mid 2010s, I was doing a lot of writing locally in Sacramento, and so I got to know him when he was first starting. Um, I met him. He said, check out my music. He was really just starting, and I did, and I liked it. And I interviewed him for the newspaper. And the article advertised one of his first like band shows. And
Hmm.
I thought it right away. He was very unique, very like nobody really sounded like him. So, anyways, so his story is like he starts like that. He's playing open mics. He has a band. He's kind of becomes like local popular, right?
Yeah.
He's able to fill clubs locally. Nobody really knows him outside of Sacramento. Then he has a video go viral in 2018, and then all of a sudden he goes to this level where he's getting major labels are bidding on him. Like he's basically getting offers from every single major label. He's got bookers. He's got everything that you would could get in the industry is suddenly he's getting offers for, and he's taking and he's trying to navigate. So he kind of goes, he signs to a major. He gets a lot of money for his first major label record. He goes through the whole process. Him and I have been, working, and he's giving me every bit of his story. And there's like, he's telling me about like meetings in Spotify and working with producers and all. It's like it's a lot of insight into like sort of the music industry. And then
Yeah.
he kind of goes a little, I don't know, I don't want to say crazy, but he starts to have a manic episode and he has very strong opinions. He kind of doesn't want to be in a major label anymore. He has very high ideals about what he wants the band to do, and he's at odds with his band. So you're kind of seeing the arc of a modern arc of somebody's kind of doing that super like the club band to like huge major label band that everyone's talking about for a moment to sort of like being totally on the outs, having
Yeah.
an album flop, and then sort of being obscure, and then sort of becoming this punching bag on the internet, which is very a unique aspect of this time. So, anyways, that's I think all of those aspects are what's interesting about his story, and I think that like I think people, regardless of their opinion of the music, will find his story interesting.
I am now really excited to read. It sounds just, especially in the last like 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
like what it means to be an artist, like you said, it has taken on, it feels like anybody with a laptop and an internet connection can make their way towards some form of success when it comes to music. Um, but
He
at
kind of
this,
comes out at this point where so TikTok's not really the thing then in 2018 that it
you know,
became. like Lil Nas X sort of is the first artist to blow up on and have a career built off of TikTok
Mhm.
virality. But and he navigates that pretty effectively, right? He
Yes.
understands he understands the tools he's dealing with and how to manipulate them and how to sort of manipulate his perception. So he's dealing with this major beast and he's doing it well, in my opinion. And then you start to see all these people sort of like blow up on TikTok, and a lot of them, they seem like they know how to do it in a way. It's like they
Yeah.
know that, okay, you get these certain followers and you have like this, you're able to negotiate a deal because you're leveraging this popularity, and there's this whole thing. But like Hobo Johnson blew up on Facebook, which is bizarre. Um, like probably the last person to ever go viral on Facebook.
I was
Um,
gonna say
his video for Peach Scone was that's where it really popped off, and it was not something that I don't think he could have ever anticipated, and was definitely not ready for. And everything that he kind of went through in his story was just sort of like he went through this. He didn't. I don't know that he really had a guide, like saying this is how you navigate this as a career, the way I think that more and more people have nowadays that are sort of trying to blow up on TikTok.
it's like the roadmap was not necessarily defined when
Yeah,
he was
that
going through it.
particular one. Yeah, that
Yes.
particular one of building a career off of a viral video.
Yeah. It feels like it's definitely gotten a lot clearer
Yeah. And
versus
yeah. And there's a lot of I think he's got a lot of, he's misunderstood in a lot of ways. People
Mhm.
place a lot of like meaning on him that's not really based off of him, but based off of what they've perceived him to be based off of his videos
Okay.
or their own feelings about his videos, which I find that fascinating. I found that fascinating the whole time he had a career, because since I knew him before he went viral, I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of who he was as a person. And then to start seeing the whole internet talk about him positively, negatively, they all like feel like they know him, and they're not really right. And all their assumptions about him as a human being.
Yeah.
It's just a
Like there may
character.
be like crumbs of truth
Yeah,
to it
yeah,
all, but they don't have the full picture
yeah.
of who he is. So
I did
going,
actually.
go
So I
ahead.
did. So before this project happened, when I ended the podcast, actually one of the big things I wanted to do was I wanted to write a novel, and I did actually draft a novel. So but then it needs a lot of work. But then this project sort of came about, and I was like, okay, I have to put the novel on hold because this one requires all my attention, because
Yeah,
we're trying to get this done by released by May 2028. So like, I have to turn in the first draft by the end of the
yeah, of
year.
course.
We're going to have it finished by May next year. So anyways, so I actually, that was a lot of what I was wanting to do when I quit the podcast, was a novel that I had in mind.
So because that was actually going to be one of my next, not necessarily the next question, but one of my next questions was going to be, do you have an idea of when you want to release the book or when the book is going to be
Mhm.
released? So you guys are like hopeful May 2028.
Well, so we have a deal with Clash, who the company that
Yeah.
released In Defense of Ska, and yeah, we've mapped out everything, and of course, it all hinges on us having it finished in time. But I think there's an attitude amongst everybody that this is the earliest it can be released in a realistically,
Hmm.
and we want it to be released as soon as possible. So I
Nice.
think there's a seriousness behind this deadline. It's not like, well, when you're finished, it's like we got
Yeah.
to try to get this done and hit these deadlines and have it released. Because even May 2028 feels like forever from now, but that there's no way to get it done sooner and have it be a decent book.
I was going to say the with all the steps in the process to actually creating a book,
Mhm.
I'm sure that's also like, yeah, it's a little less than 2 years away, but at the same time, it's we got all this other stuff we have to do, fact checking, making sure it's everything is structured and flows correctly. I mean, I've never written a book, so I don't know for sure, but uh it has to be such a process to just go through. And so, what do you feel was the biggest difference between going from writing a
Hmm.
defense of ska music as a genre to now writing, for lack of a better way of putting it, a biography
Hmm.
of an artist?
Well, it's a singular story, so in one sense, I I'm just telling a single individual story, and like what In Defense of Ska was like a million stories, right?
Yeah.
There was like I probably did like 150 interviews and also endless research that wasn't me doing interviews. So In Defense of Ska was like trying to think about the big picture of the genre, try to think of the slightly less big picture of like these individual moments or scenes or locations, eras, and then
Hmm.
the individual stories of every single participant that I'm talking about. And some of those people in Defense of Scars kind of get some more overt story arcs. Some of them are mentioned very briefly, but it's like everybody has a story, and a lot of these stories are overlapping and stuff. So trying to do justice to that was a lot of work. So with Hobo Johnson, it's really just about capturing his story. And I think, it's not my story, it's his story, and I'm helping him. But I think the main thing I'm doing, why I'm the co-writer, is I'm helping be the voice of this is the this is probably the structure you want. This is probably the information you should focus on and include.
Hmm.
This is stuff is not important. Like I think that stuff is what I'm probably going to be most utilized for.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just really about a specific skill of like storytelling, that for this one. And it's interesting. It's an interesting project for me to be um, doing it this way. I had wanted to write a biography on a single subject. I kind of had been, for after Defense of Sky, I thought it'd be really fun to do not a co-author for a memoir, but like do a biography for like one specific band or one specific artist and tell their full story. I thought that was an interesting idea, but I just nothing really landed for me. But this one actually came up like a couple of years ago. Frank and I, his real name's Frank. We talked a few times a few years ago about potentially doing this book, and he was kind of interested, but then it's like I don't think this is the right time. And then he texted me like beginning somewhere like February, March this year, and said he wanted to like revisit the idea,
Hmm.
and and we talked a few times, and he was totally ready to do it, and I had to like sort of adjust my schedule. Like I said, I was working on this novel and I had to like, I had to make some personal choices in my life to make space for it. Because it's to me, this sort of came out of nowhere. The revision, the revival of this idea and understanding the seriousness of it. And, um, but some of the reason why he asked me, he said that he wanted to revisit it was because the the amount of voices making fun of him and making him this subject of analyzation has really grown since like last December.
Yeah.
And I had said to him a few years ago, because there was some of that, and I was like, I think it would be really good for you to tell your own story. And like everyone's all these people are telling your story without your help. Like you should tell your own story. Like you should put
Yeah.
your own story out there because clearly people are interested in your story, and some of it they don't understand at all because they're just filling in the gaps with their own imagination. So I think he saw the value in that with like the level of scrutiny raising the way it did this year.
Yeah. I was gonna say it could only help him at this point
I think so.
because
Yeah,
and I honestly, the more hearing you talk about it does make me excited to actually read it and to hear his story more
Hmm.
than just anything else. Uh, you said you also have a novel in you, even though that's currently set aside.
Yeah.
Uh, is there anything else specific to maybe like a book that you would like to write, or is it just kind of like right now your focus is here, everything else is kind of pushed to the side a little bit?
So what I'm actually actively doing right now isn't a book. I mean, aside from Hobo Johnson,
Yeah,
I have a Substack. You probably read the thing I wrote on Hobo Johnson on my Substack.
yeah,
I've been sporadic with it, but I've been wanting to have that be something that I'm regular with. And so I
nice.
want to start with I'm starting with the goal sometime, in the next month or so where I'm going to start releasing something like every other week at least. And it's going to be the focus is going to be music, but it's going to be pretty wide and it's going to be very much based off of stuff that I want to write about or focus
Yeah,
on. And it's going to be open-ended too, um, like I drafted a piece because in 2016, I wrote an article. 2016, there was these first waves of like AI music happening, and they were real weird. And I thought they were interesting. And so I wrote an article. I interviewed a bunch of people who were sort of producing them and like companies that were starting to develop software. And now AI music and AI art in general is a totally different thing. And it's very
yeah,
off-putting. But I thought it was interesting. Like I'm not saying I was necessarily like super into it, but I thought it was interesting because the stuff that they were producing, like by design of the level it was at, was sort of produced these sort of odd,
yeah.
like they couldn't produce exactly what they wanted to, so they produced these like odd offbeat things, and I thought that was kind of interesting. um so yeah, anyways, I'm kind of like revisiting that article, and I'm kind of like what's kind of, just I want to analyze AI music from then to now. That's one thing. I actually requested an interview with Frank Turner. I'm going to talk to him about one of my favorite songs of his. And
Can I
yeah.
ask what song?
Oh, Silent Key. Do you know that song?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I've Frank Turner is in my top five of artists that I've seen based on how many times I've seen them live.
Hmm.
Um, I first saw Frank Turner when he was opening for Flogging Molly. We went and saw him at the Camel in Richmond for my wife's 21st birthday. This was when he was still like, this was pre, like he was big in England. He was just really starting to turn here in the States. But it was still before like he opened the London Olympics. So Frank Turner is it is one of those artists my wife and I connected over. So like I hold a very special place in my heart for Frank. He's incredible. So also he took shots with me and my wife and he brought my
Oh,
wife on
nice.
stage to play the harmonica.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, and
So
then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to go see the artist Rosalia, who released my favorite record of the year so far, Lux. And I'm gonna I think I'm gonna try to turn that into something. That's my plan, anyways. Anyway, so I'm just, you can see that it's all like related to music, but it runs the gamut of different styles and different types of writing. And
but that's awesome. I mean,
hopefully by doing it enough, I'll sort of come up with a thread. And that's
yeah.
kind of what I want to put some of my creativity there. And I think it fits with building up towards Hobo Johnson book, because it's like I'm kind of building a platform that represents the diversity of my musical interest and my perspective on music.
I
So
was gonna say I really love seeing that because I mean just based on just reading the book, you could tell that there's a lot more to you than just I love ska and let me defend it to my dying breath. It's more along the lines of that the interest in music is more than just one genre
yeah.
specific. So, and that's, I mean, something I can definitely understand, having being raised on like Frank Sinatra, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and Queen to now like really enjoying ska music, but at the same time, my wife is trying to convert me into a Swiftie, and it just
Mhm.
there's so much out there, especially this day and age where it's so easy to find music. So, um, that's all I have,
All right.
Aaron. Thank you so very much for coming on the show, for talking about the book, for talking about the podcast, and giving us a little bit of a glimpse into what's in your future. Um, can you tell us where to find your Substack? Um,
It's just I think it's just Aaron Carnes. But is it Aaron Dash Carnes? I can't remember. Let me look it up real quick. Um oh,
sorry, I threw that at you too. Um,
I should
uh,
know this. I don't know what's I should have yeah. Yeah, it's Aaron Carnes.
okay. Uh, you can find the book In Defense of Ska, second edition as well. You can find that just about anywhere. Is there anywhere specific we should be buying it from?
Well, I mean, wherever you want to buy it is fine with me, but if you're anti-Amazon, you can go to bookshop.org. That's always a good place. If you supporting local bookstores is key. If you have a local bookstore in your area, you can either go in, they either have it. If they don't have it, you can just ask them to order it and they will order it. That's a way to support a local bookstore. If you don't want to do that and you don't want to give your money to Amazon, bookshop.org, like I said, is a good alternative to Amazon, and they donate some of their proceeds of every sale to local bookstores all over the country. Um, if you don't want to buy it and you want to get it at the library, that's I encourage that because you go to your library, either they have it and they're glad and it's reaffirming them that people are getting this book, or if they don't have it, you can request it and then they will buy a copy. And then that's a sale for me, just the same as you buying your own copy. So
There you go.
I think like getting copies from the library is a great way to go for anybody.
I 100% agree with that. Aaron, thank you so much. We truly appreciate you. I truly appreciate your abilities as a writer and as just lack of a better way of putting it, a historian of sharing the stories of others and, you know, sharing it in such a way that I'm not very good at reading. I have a hard time picking up a book and sticking with it. The fact that I picked up this book and I stuck with it the entire time, that kind of opened up my love of reading again.
Mhm.
So I truly appreciate you as a writer and as a historian. Uh, thank you for coming on the show. Um, next week, I don't know what I'm doing yet. We're either going to be talking about Goldfinger, maybe we'll do the Heather Augustine interview. Maybe we're talking with Gary from Backyard Superheroes. I'm
Hey,
still trying to get that guy to sit down, uh, because we're doing an episode not necessarily about Backyard Superheroes, but ska in general, Backyard Superheroes, and Star Wars. Because why not? I guess.
yeah.
So yeah, so we will see you guys next week as we continue on this road to Supernova, which is coming up. I believe it's September 12th and 13th. I will be there. I don't think Aaron will, but if he is, go say hi to him because he's awesome. Um, anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks, guys. Good night.